of FW De Klerk, the man who led the apartheid regime to a path of negotiating towards peace, freedom and democracy in South Africa after playing a role in the apartheid machinery, which did lead to the oppression of millions of people. Someone who played a very important role in the struggle, spent much time on Robben Island for it, then led an illegal operation into South Africa from Kontawesizwe for the ANC, and then played an important role in the negotiations before playing his own role in cabinets and in other areas, is Mac Maharaj. Mac, good afternoon to you, sir. I can't imagine how you feel about FW De Klerk. He changed this country. He, in a way, made sure that this country, or rather led the apartheid regime towards democracy, but he also played an important role in the system of apartheid. How do you feel this afternoon?
Well, Stephen, first of all, allow me to convey condolences to Elita, to Susan, Willem and Jan, and the grandchildren of former Deputy President FW De Klerk. How do I feel? Well, there are no straight answers, but what I can say is that I think he wrote himself into the history of our country by being able to cross the Rubicon, particularly with regards to his national party and the white community. But I have to say at the same time that he failed to take South Africa across Rubicon when, in 1996, he pulled out of the government of national unity after the Constitutional Assembly had passed the 1996 Constitution and after Parliament had passed the Truth and Reconciliation Act. That act failed for him to recognize that he needed to proceed and walk into the new South Africa. So he crossed the Rubicon for the National Party and the white community. He failed to cross the Rubicon for our country.
You were part of the negotiations, and you would have negotiated in a way sort of against his people. I mean, with his people, but against his people at Kadesa. You would have been involved in the talks and all of the discussions with the ANC and the National Party, even before those talks. What was he like during that time? I mean, when you came face to face with him, when you dealt with the people he was sending into negotiations?
He was not a difficult person to engage with, but I was never convinced that he had an open mind. I think he had clear ideas where he wanted to go, but those clear ideas were born, Stephen, out of a tremendous experience which led to a deep understanding of the white community and in particular of the internal workings of the National Party. He had a great strategic sense in that regard, in that constituency, and he had a great tactical sense. But as you interacted with him, you felt that move to unban the organizations which wrote him into history was still clouded by a vision that did not understand the overwhelming majority of our country. He did not understand the question at Kruger's here that Pik Botha has referred to in his biography, where he says Mandela talked about the history of the country, of the ANC, the oppressed people, and then of the history of the Afrikaner. And he said what he could not understand about the Afrikaner was that having fought against colonialism for freedom, they were unable to recognize that freedom is indivisible and need to be extended to all. And Pik Botha confesses that question from Mandela was a question that even Pik could not answer because they had not seen that question from that angle. So I think that was a historical trap out of which they could not work themselves out easily. And I think it lingered on right up to 1996. So in the negotiations, up to the last minute at the multi-party talks, he was still holding out. His delegation was seeking to find ways to manipulate and create a mechanism that would have a disguised form of a white veto, a minority veto. And that could only come from a failure to understand that freedom is indivisible. So, easy to discuss with a courteous person, but amenable to listening up to a point, beyond which he remained in the trap that the Afrikaner community had driven themselves under their existing leadership.
Would one way to describe him, from what you say, Mac, be to say that he supported a transition, but he was not someone who supported the actual transformation of South Africa as we understand that phrase, transformation?
That's a very interesting and good formulation, supporting a transition but not the transformation of our country, but meaning by transformation a deep-seated democracy in which our country is de-racialized, transformed so that equality has real meaning for all people, irrespective of their color, of their gender, of their religious faith, of their religious orientation, of their sexual orientation. That is the challenge of our country.
It must have been quite interesting to see him as a deputy president in the government of national unity. It's very rare to see someone who was a president becoming a deputy president after effectively giving up power. Although I think the question of whether he had any choice in giving up that power, if you look at the forces of history at the time, is an important one. But I mean, it still must have been interesting to see him as a deputy president in that government of national unity before he then walked out.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that he ever was comfortable, but there were many, many moments when President Mandela at Cabinet would see that we were failing to come to meeting of minds of a proposed legislation, for example, the TRC, and President Mandela would propose that the two deputy presidents go together and find a way forward. And we often crafted a way forward, but you can see that once the TRC Act was passed, he was clearly unhappy with it. And once the Constitutional Assembly adopted the Constitution, he was again clearly unhappy. And you ask yourself, if you were for transformation and deep-seated, all-embracing democracy, then what was the reservation? And the reservation clearly was wanting a change where the past is simply wiped out because you say, I agree to a democracy. That's such a historical view. But it is an understandable view in the way changes have taken place in country after country. So I'm not here to condemn him for what he did. I'm here to express a regret that he failed to walk further than he could have, than he should have gone, than he went. And that I think that one has to try and understand how that happens, because it happens to many historical figures. They come up for change and then they get stuck. And you have to keep understanding what keeps them stuck in that rut and failing to take the next step.
Mac Maharaj, sir, for your thoughts today and your reaction, and if I may say, your feelings. Thank you very much indeed. Mac Maharaj, you know, of course, Robben Island prisoner, played a very important role during the transition to democracy, then into cabinet, and of course other roles at a later stage. Well, we'll get more reaction